My name is Hank Boyd and I'm 62 years old. Last October, on my granddaughter's 8th birthday, I drove to my son's house with a wrapped present under my arm. And my daughter-in-law met me on the front porch, put her flat hand on my chest to stop me from coming in, and told me through her teeth to go around the back and use the garage because, and I'm quoting her exactly, the help doesn't come through the front. And then, when one of her friends leaned out the door and asked who I was, she smiled and said, loud enough for the whole party to hear, "Oh, that's just the handyman, he's here to look at the water heater, ignore him." I was standing on the porch of a $740,000 house, and here is the part she had spent 2 solid years making sure she never had to think about. That house was not theirs, it was mine. My name, through my company, was the only name on that deed. I bought it with cash. I paid the taxes on it, the insurance on it, the landscaping, the pool, the alarm, and about a dozen other things they'd convinced themselves just fell out of the sky. She had been telling every person she met that they owned it, that my son's business was booming, that they were doing great. And by 9 o'clock that same night, quietly, without raising my voice one single time, every lock on that house had been changed, and every secret payment I'd been making for 2 years had gone dark. If you have ever been the man who quietly held the whole thing up while the people standing on top of you looked down and called you small, this story is for you. Stay with me to the end, because what she said to me 2 weeks before that porch is the thing that turned my patience off for good. And the way this all landed is not what a single person at that birthday party would have bet $1 on. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, and let me take you all the way back. Because to understand that porch, you have to understand the 40 years and the one broken heart that led up to it. Let me tell you who I actually am, because the woman with her hand on my chest had decided who I was without ever once bothering to ask. I have spent my entire life buying broken houses and fixing them. That is the whole empire. When I was 24 years old, I bought a dump with a caved-in porch that nobody in the county wanted, and I fixed it myself over one long winter, on my knees with my own 2 hands, and I rented it out, and I took that money and I bought another one. 40 years later, I own a couple dozen units through a small company I keep no fancier than it needs to be, and it throws off more money in a month than most people I know see in a year. And I will tell you what I still drive. A work van with a ladder rack and 200,000 miles on it. I still wear Carhartts with a putty knife in the chest pocket. I still crawl under my own sinks and fix my own toilets, because that is who I am. And because my wife Ruth used to say, a man who forgets how to fix things forgets who he is. I never told a living soul the numbers. Not my son, not anybody. Ruth knew. And Ruth is gone now, 3 years this spring. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because it matters to everything that comes after. When she got sick, I sold nothing. I spared no expense. I would have signed over every building I owned to buy her one more good year, and none of it was enough, and she died in the spring with her hand in mine. And after she was gone, I got quiet in a way I had never been before. The kind of quiet where the house is too big and the evenings are too long, and you start pouring everything you have left into the only people you have left. And the people I had left were my son Greg, his wife Vanessa, and 2 grandbabies who were the only reason my heart still bothered to keep time. So I poured. I poured into that family like a river into low ground for 3 years, and I asked for nothing back. And one of them repaid me by telling her friends I was the handyman. Now let me tell you about my son, because you need to understand Greg to understand how a good man lets a thing like this happen under his own roof. Greg is a kind boy who grew into a soft man, and I say that with all the love I have. He is decent and he is gentle, and he has never once in his life had a backbone when a backbone actually cost him something. Ruth used to fret about it, and I always told her he'd find it when he needed it. Turns out he needed it for 8 years and never went looking. Because 8 years ago, Greg married Vanessa, and Vanessa came from a particular kind of people. The kind who perform money the way other folks perform religion. Her father drove a leased German car and talked about deals that never quite closed. Her mother wore labels she couldn't afford and corrected your grammar at the dinner table. And from the very first day she laid eyes on me, Vanessa looked at my van and my hands and my boots and decided I was an embarrassment that she was going to have to manage for the rest of her life. I saw it clear as day at their wedding. I'd come to the church straight from patching a roof on one of my units because a tenant had water pouring into a baby's room, and I don't make babies wait. And I changed into a good suit in the church bathroom, but I still had a smudge of roofing tar on the side of one boot. And Vanessa clocked that boot from clear across the reception hall. and her whole face went sour. And later that night, I overheard her introduce me to her college friends. You want to know what she said? She said, "That's Greg's dad. He's in maintenance." In maintenance. I owned more square footage of that county than her entire family had ever set foot in, and she introduced me to a room full of strangers as maintenance. And I looked over at my son, standing right there, and my son said nothing. He just looked at his shoes, and I let it go. That was the first time I let it go, and here's the thing I have learned the hard way in 62 years. Every time you let it go, you are not keeping the peace. You are teaching the person that they can do it again. So let me tell you how the house happened, and I need you to follow the money real close, because the money is the whole spine of this thing. About 3 years ago, right after I lost Ruth, Greg and Vanessa were renting a place that Vanessa hated, and she was miserable about it every single day because every one of her friends was buying houses in the good school district and she was not. And my grandbabies were about to start school, and I wanted those kids in that district too. So I did the only thing I know how to do when a problem has a price tag. I found a house. A good, solid $740,000 house in the best part of town with a pool and a yard and good bones. And I bought it, cash, through my company. Deed in the company's name, exactly the way I have bought every single piece of property for 40 years. I did not put a mortgage on those kids. There wasn't one. I told them, plain, sitting at their kitchen table, this house is so my grandbabies have a good, safe place to grow up. It's in the company's name for tax and liability reasons. You just live in it and you take care of it, and that's all I ask. And Greg said, "Thanks, Dad," and got a little choked up. And Vanessa said, "Thank you, Hank," in the exact voice you'd use to thank a valet. And they moved in. And that, right there, that moment, is where the lie was born. Because from the very first week, Vanessa told every human being she met that they had bought that house, that Greg's business was booming, that they'd gotten into the district. She built her whole entire self on top of that house, and the house was mine. And she spent 2 years making absolutely sure that nobody, least of all her friends, ever found that out. And it did not stop at the house. Oh no. Once they were in, the expenses started rolling in like a tide, and I quietly picked each one up one at a time because I loved those kids and because it was easier than a fight I didn't have the heart for. The property taxes, mine. The insurance, mine. The homeowners association dues, mine. Then Vanessa decided the yard had to be done by the same fancy landscaping outfit all her friends used, $400 a month, and somehow that became mine too. The pool service, mine. When Greg's truck payment got tight 1 month, I quietly set up autopay out of my own account and never said a word about it, and it just stayed on for 2 years. When Vanessa wanted a store credit card she couldn't qualify for on her own, she batted her eyes and asked me to co-sign, and I did. And when the balance climbed to numbers that would make you dizzy, I paid that too, in silence. Add it all up, and I was moving something north of $5,000 a month, every month, under that house, like a current running under a floor. And Vanessa stood on top of that floor and called the whole thing hers. And every month I paid for the privilege of being introduced as the help. Now, let me tell you how they actually treated me over those 2 years, because it built slow, the way a leak rots a beam. You don't see it, and you don't see it, and then one day you lean on the beam, and the whole thing gives. At first, it was just Vanessa wincing at my clothes when I came by, telling me maybe I could change out of the work stuff before the neighbors see. Then it was finding out about the grandkids' events after they'd already happened. The Christmas concert, I heard about the next day. Oh, we forgot to tell you, my grandson's first soccer game, same thing. It was so last minute. Then it was Vanessa introducing me at a barbecue as Greg's dad. He helps us out with the house stuff, which, if you heard it cold, made me sound like a contractor they kept on a leash. But I'll tell you the two that actually cut me, the two I couldn't get out from under. The first was a dinner party they threw, a real fancy one. And when I got there, I found they'd set the dining table for everyone but me. There was no place for me. Vanessa waved a hand and said, "Oh, Hank, we didn't think you'd want to sit through all the boring grown-up talk. There's a plate for you in the kitchen. A plate for me in the kitchen, in a house I bought, and I ate it too." I sat on a stool at the counter of the house I paid for, and I ate my dinner alone while I listened to them laugh in the other room, and I told myself it wasn't worth a scene. And the second one, the one that still put the stone in my chest, was my granddaughter. Because children absorb what they hear, and Vanessa was pouring poison into those kids about me a drop at a time without ever saying a cruel word out loud. I started to notice my granddaughter, this little 7-year-old I would have walked through fire for, looking at me the way you look at somebody your mother has quietly taught you doesn't quite matter. And then one afternoon, she climbed up on my lap and she said, in that innocent little voice, "Grandpa, are you poor?" And I said, "Now why would you ask me that, sweetheart?" And she said, "Because mommy says you smell like your van and that's why you can't sit with us." And I held that little girl and I smiled and I said something gentle, but inside me something cracked right down the middle. Because I understood in that moment that Vanessa was not just embarrassed by me, she was raising my grandchildren to be embarrassed by me. And that was the thing I could not let go of. And yet, God forgive me, I still let it go. Now, here is the part I need you to hold on to, because it is what makes everything I did later not just fair, but overdue. About 2 weeks before that birthday party, Greg called me and asked to come by, and he sat in my kitchen and he wouldn't look at me. And finally, he got it out. Vanessa wanted me to sign the house over to them, put it in their names. "For tax reasons, Dad," he said, "but I have bought and sold property for 40 years, and I knew exactly what it was." They wanted to refinance it. They wanted to pull cash out of the house I bought and paid for to fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford using my gift as the collateral. She didn't want me at her dinner table. She didn't want me at the grandkids' concerts. She was telling her friends I was the handyman, and she wanted me to hand her the deed to a $750,000 house so she could borrow against it. I looked at my son and I said, "Let me think about it." And I did think about it. I thought about it right up until she put her hand on my chest on that porch, and then I stopped thinking about it and I started acting. So, the birthday party, my granddaughter's 8th. I had not gotten what you would call a formal invitation, more of a "we're doing a little thing on Saturday" mentioned in passing on a phone call. But she is my granddaughter and I bought her a present, a real one, a little toolkit with pink handles, because she'd once watched me fix a hinge and been fascinated for about 4 whole minutes before her mother pulled her away. And I thought, maybe. And I'll be honest with you about the second reason I drove over there that day, because it turns out to matter. The house has a smart monitor on the water heater, because it is my property and I put monitoring on all my properties, and it had been throwing me a fault code for 2 days straight. So I figured I'd bring the present, hug my grandbabies, and fix the water heater while I was under the roof. 3 birds, 1 trip. I pulled up and the whole street was lined with cars. The party was in full swing, Vanessa's entire circle, the leased car crowd, the grammar correcting crowd. Through the front window, I could see a gift table piled so high with expensive presents that my little pink toolkit suddenly looked like exactly what it was, a working man's gift at a party full of people pretending. And I almost turned around. I want you to know that. I almost just left the present on the step and drove home. But she's my granddaughter, so I walked up. And Vanessa came out that front door fast, like she'd been standing at the window watching for exactly this. And she crossed the porch in 3 steps and put her flat hand on my chest and stopped me cold. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, low, so the party couldn't hear. "You can't be here right now. Not today. Go around back. Use the garage. The help doesn't come through the front." And I just stood there and looked at her. And that was when her friend, wine glass in hand, leaned out the door and chirped, "Vanessa, honey, who's this?" And I watched my daughter-in-law's whole face slide from venom back into charm in about half a second. And she turned and she smiled and she said, "Oh, that's just the handyman. He's here to look at the water heater. Ignore him." And my granddaughter was standing right there in the doorway in her little party dress with a paper crown on her head. And she heard her mother call me the handyman, and she looked at me, and I waited. I waited for my grandbaby to say, "That's my grandpa." And she didn't. She'd been taught too well. She just looked at me the way you look at the help, and then she turned around and went back to her party, back to her mountain of presents, and left me standing on the porch of the house I bought for her. Now, I am going to tell you exactly what I did next, because it is the whole difference between a man and a small man. I did not yell. I did not throw the present. I did not make one single scene in front of a porch full of strangers on my grandchild's birthday, because whatever was happening between the grown-ups, that was her day and I was not going to be the thing she remembered about it. So I bent down and I set the present on the little table by the door, real gentle, and I said, "Sure, I'll take a look at that water heater." And I walked around the back, through the garage, the way the help goes in, and I went down into the basement of the house that I own, and I fixed the water heater on my knees while the party stomped and laughed right over my head. I could hear them up there. I could hear Vanessa's voice, bright and shining, telling some story about our house, our beautiful house. And I tightened the last fitting, and I wiped my greasy hands on a shop rag, and I climbed the stairs and I let myself out the back. And I got in my van and I drove home. And I did not say one single word to anybody. Here is the thing about that drive home that I need you to understand. I was not angry yet. I was something worse than angry. I was grieving because somewhere on that porch, with my grandbaby's silence still ringing in my ears, I had finally understood, all the way down to the floor of me, that the family I had been pouring my whole broken heart into for 3 years did not see a father or a grandfather or a man. They saw a wallet in Carhartts. And I thought about Ruth the entire way home. I thought about what she would say, and I knew exactly what she'd say, because she said it to me once about a tenant who kept taking advantage of my good nature. She had looked at me over her reading glasses and she'd said, "Hank, you are the kindest man I have ever known, and your kindness is a door. And some people will only ever see a door as a thing to walk through." And I sat at a red light with my greasy hands on the wheel, and I decided that the door was closing. Tonight. Now, a lesser man goes home and rages, puts his fist through a wall, gets on the phone and screams. I didn't do any of that. I went home and I got out a yellow legal pad, the same kind I've used to plan every job for 40 years, and I made a list, calm as a Sunday morning. And then I started making phone calls. And by 9 o'clock that night, here is everything I had quietly done. First, I called my lawyer. Sharp woman named Delia handled my company for 15 years. I told her the whole story, start to finish, and there was a long silence on the line. And then she said, "Hank, that house is yours, free and clear, and they're living in it purely at your say-so. And you can end that whenever you choose, as long as we do it exactly right." I said, "Do it exactly right." And we did. She drew up a formal notice on company letterhead that very night, laying out the plain truth, that the property was owned by my company, that their occupancy was a courtesy, not a right, and that the courtesy was now over, with everything moving to a proper legal footing going forward. That notice went out that night. Then I called a locksmith I've used on my rentals for 20 years, a fella who owes me more favors than he could pay back in a lifetime, and I booked him for first thing the next morning to rekey every lock on the house, which is my absolute right as the owner, with the notice served and everything square. And then I sat down at my computer and I opened up my auto pay and I went through it one line at a time and I turned it all off. The property tax escrow, off. The insurance, off. Moved on to my own separate policy where it should have been all along. The HOA, off. The $400 landscaping, canceled. The pool service, canceled. Greg's truck payment, off. And that store credit card I'd co-signed and been quietly carrying, I paid off the entire balance one final time, and then I called the bank and I took my name off of it and closed that door forever. Every invisible thing I had been doing, every silent dollar that flowed under that house and held up Vanessa's entire performance for 2 years, I turned it off, one switch at a time, calm as still water. It took me about 2 hours, and when I was done, I made myself a cup of coffee and I sat down in Ruth's old chair, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like a man again. The next day is when it all came home to them, and it came in pieces, which I will confess to you was almost the sweetest part. First, Vanessa's landscaping crew didn't show, and she called them, and they told her the account had been closed by the property owner. The property owner? She didn't even understand the words coming out of the phone. Then the locksmith arrived while she was out running errands with my written authorization and rekeyed the whole house. And when Vanessa came home, her key didn't turn in her own front door. The very door she had blocked me from the day before. And she stood on that porch, that exact porch, rattling a key in a lock that no longer knew her. Then Greg's phone buzzed with a bounced truck payment. And then, and this is the one I'd have paid money to see, Vanessa's store card got declined at the register in front of 2 of her friends, and she had to put the whole cart back. All of it landed on the same single afternoon, one floor at a time, like a building coming down in slow motion. They came to my house that evening, both of them. Greg looking like he'd been hit by a bus, and Vanessa somewhere past, furious into a kind of white-faced terror. She came through my front door without knocking, waving Delia's notice in the air, and she was already shouting before she was all the way inside. "What is this? What did you do? You changed our locks? You cannot do that. This is our house. You have no right. You can't just..." And I let her run all the way to the bottom of her tank. And when she finally ran out of air, I said, quiet as anything, "It's not your house, Vanessa. It never was. Not for one single day." And I laid it all out on the kitchen table. The deed, with my company's name printed right there. The purchase records from 3 years back. And then the stack, 2 years of payments. printed out line by line, the taxes and the insurance and the HOA and the landscaping and the pool and the truck and that credit card, every dollar I had quietly moved to hold up her beautiful life, adding up to a number with a whole lot of zeros. And I let her look at it. I watched her read that deed 3 times, like the words might rearrange themselves if she just stared hard enough. And then I said, and I kept my voice as flat as a man reading a grocery list, "You told your friends you bought this house. You told them Greg's business was booming. 2 weeks ago, you sent my son over here to ask me to sign it into your name so you could borrow against it. And then yesterday, on that porch, you called me the handyman in front of my own granddaughter in a house I paid for down to the light bulbs in the ceiling. So I'm done being the handyman. The handyman went home last night and turned everything off." And here's the moment the whole room broke open, and it was not Vanessa, it was Greg. Because my son, my soft-hearted, spineless boy, sat down heavy at that kitchen table and put his face in both his hands, and he started to cry. Not a little. He broke. And through it, he said, Dad, I knew the whole time. I let her do it because it was easier, because I was ashamed, and I don't even know why I was ashamed. You gave us everything. And I stood there and let her treat you like, and he couldn't even finish it. And I'm going to be honest with you, that broke something loose in me too, because there was my 36-year-old boy finally finding the backbone his mother swore up and down he had, and finding it about 3 years too late, and being honest about the worst thing he had ever done to another human being. I put my hand on the back of his neck, the way I used to when he was small. I didn't tell him it was okay, because it wasn't, but I put my hand on his neck, and Vanessa did the one thing that told me everything I ever needed to know about her, and cured me forever of any last little scrap of guilt. In that exact moment, with her husband sobbing beside her and the truth spread out on the table, she did not say she was sorry. She calculated. I watched her face do the math, the same cold arithmetic I had seen one other kind of person do in my life, and she landed, like she always lands, on the money. She said, and her voice was shaking, but there was greed running right underneath the shake. Okay, so what do you want? You want us to buy it from you? We'll do payments. Or you gift it to us for the taxes. That actually makes more sense, and we'll look. And I looked at her, and I understood that even now, even with her husband weeping and the whole thing in ashes, she still thought this was a negotiation over who got to keep the house. She had built her entire identity on my foundation, and the second she could finally see the foundation, the only thought in her head was how to get her name carved into it. I said no, just that, no. And then I told them exactly what was going to happen, because I had already decided it the night before in Ruth's chair. And once I decide a thing, it is decided. And this is where a real man separates himself from a small one, so listen close. Because I could have thrown my own grandchildren out onto the street to punish their mother, and I would rather have eaten that deed than do it. So I didn't. I gave them a choice, and it was a fair one, fairer than they had earned. Option 1, they could stay in the house, but on honest terms, a real lease, real market rent, like real tenants, the free ride over, but the roof still over my grandbabies' heads. The disrespect ends today, and I come back into my grandchildren's lives as their grandfather, not their handyman. Or option 2, I sell the house, and every last dollar of it, the whole $740,000 plus everything it had gone up to, goes straight into a locked trust for my 2 grandchildren for their education and their future. Sealed up tight where not one adult in that room could ever lay a finger on it. And Greg and Vanessa go and find themselves a place they can actually afford on what they actually earn. Greg chose option 1 before Vanessa could even open her mouth. He wiped his face and he said, "We'll pay rent, Dad, a real lease, whatever it is, and it stops today." And then he turned and looked at his wife and he said, "It stops today," again, directly to her. And it was the very first time in 8 years I had ever watched my son look at Vanessa like the man of his own house. And Vanessa didn't say a word. She had lost, and she knew it. And the very worst part for her was still coming, because she still had to walk back out there and face all those friends. Now let me tell you how it landed, because the aftermath is where a person like Vanessa truly pays the bill. The truth got out the way the truth always does. Because when a woman's landscaping gets canceled and her credit card gets declined at the register and her father-in-law's company name turns out to be on the deed of the house she's been bragging about for 2 years, people talk. Her whole circle, those leased car people, put it together fast. And the story went around that district like a grease fire. And Vanessa's entire performance, the boomtown husband, the house they bought, the self-made life, all of it popped like the cheap balloon it always was. She stopped hosting. She stopped posting. And it turned out that a good number of those friends had only ever been friends with the house, because the second the house wasn't what they thought, they simply evaporated. And if Vanessa had had the eyes to see it, that would have taught her something real about the exact thing she'd spent her whole life chasing. But I doubt she saw it. People like that rarely do. Greg and Vanessa are still together, for now, though I honestly could not tell you how that marriage shakes out in the end, and it is not mine to fix. What I can tell you is that my son is a different man than he was. They pay me rent on time, every single month, a real and honest amount, and I will tell you the strangest thing. It is the healthiest thing that has ever passed between us, because for the first time in 3 years, nobody is pretending to be anything. And you want to know about all that money I turned off? I never turned most of it back on. And here is what happened. They learned to live on what they actually make. Vanessa got a job, an actual, real job. The first one in 8 years. Turns out the woman had some hustle in her the whole time. She just never once needed it while I was the river running silent under her feet. But I want to end on the grandkids, because they were the whole reason any of it ever mattered to me in the first place. About 2 months after all of this, my granddaughter, the birthday girl, called me on the telephone, all by herself, which she had never once done in her life. And in this shy little voice, she asked me if maybe I could come over and show her how to fix the drippy faucet in her bathroom, because she remembered that I fixed things, and she said she wanted to learn how. And I drove over there in my van in my Carhartts with the putty knife in my pocket, and I walked in through the front door, and I took my 8-year-old granddaughter down under that bathroom sink, and I showed her how to seat a new washer and stop that drip cold. And her little hands got all wet, and she laughed that laugh. And when we were done, she looked up at me with the most serious face, and she said, "Grandpa, you're not the handyman. You're the guy who owns the whole house." And I got something in my eye right about then, and I said, "That's right, sweetheart. And if you learn to do this, someday you'll own the whole house too." Here is what 40 years and one closed door taught me, and then I'll let you go. The people who call you the help are not telling you a single thing about who you are. They are telling you everything about who they are. The loudest person in the house is almost never the one holding it up, and the person actually holding it up almost never needs you to know it. I spent 3 years being the quiet current, running under a life that called me the handyman. And the day I finally turned that current off, every last one of them found out in a hurry exactly who had been keeping the lights on. Real providers don't announce it. They just hold the deed, and they wait, and they pray to God they never have to prove it. And when some fool finally makes them prove it, they only ever have to do it one time. That is my story. A whole house full of people ashamed of the man who paid for the house, right up until the night the handyman drove home and turned off all the lights. If you have ever held everything up while the people standing on top of you looked down and called you small, do me one favor and hold your deed. Your day is coming. Drop a comment down below and tell me about the time somebody mistook your kindness for weakness. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one, and I will see you there.